Welcome everybody to the closing panel of the second annual Platypus Affiliated Society West Coast Conference. As we mentioned before, there is platypus chapters across the West Coast, including here at UC Irvine, but also at UC San Diego, UCLA, UC Santa Cruz, Berkeley, Stanford, Oregon State University, where I'm from, and Portland State University. The Platypus Affiliated Society, established in December of 2006, organizes reading groups, public fora, research, and journalism focused on problems and tasks inherited from the old, 1920s to 30s, new, 1960s to 70s, and post-political, 1980s to 90s, left for the possibility of emancipatory politics today. I want to hand things over to our moderator, Ishmael. Take it away.
All right, let me introduce our panelists. Alex Kotov is an executive for the San Diego cell of the California chapter of the American Communist Party and a former member of the Communist Party of the United States. He has been invited in the past years, he has been active in the past years, coordinating food relief, flood relief, and community rebuilding efforts in San Ysidro area for the CPUSA in collaboration with the city of San Diego. He has self-published several works on the history of science and philosophy of Marxism-Leninism, with an up-and-coming publication under review for the ACP Party journal, Red America. He has focused primarily on grassroots organization in San Diego and focused primarily in the San Diego and Riverside County area. Jeff Mackler is the National Secretary of Socialist Action, Socialist Action's 2016 and 2020 candidate for U.S. presidency. He is on the National Administrative Committee and the founder of the United National Anti-War Coalition. He directs the mobilization to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. He is also the past steering committee member for Julian Assange defense, past in Northern California climate mobilization. He is also the author of 25 books and pamphlets on the political and social justice issues as he edits the Socialist Action newspaper. Amy Iris Parker is an organizer in the Democratic Socialists of America in its youth wing, the Young Democratic Socialists of America. Her organization is primarily, her organizing is primarily throughout Orange County, focusing on the development of the student movement at the California State University, Fullerton. Finally, Tom Wetzel received a PhD in philosophy at UCLA in 1978. He has written essays on labor history, worker struggles, libertarian socialist ideas, and housing struggles. He is currently an editor of Worker Solidarity webzine of the East Bay Syndicalist Group. He currently focuses on green syndicalism. His essays have been published across Z Network and War Magazine. He is the author of Overcoming Capitalism, Strategy for the Working Class in the 21st Century. We also want to thank Tom for agreeing to be on this panel on very short notice, and for this reason, he'll be given the opportunity to speak last. The guideline for the panels are: panelists have a minimum of 12 minutes to state their initial remarks. I will let them know when they have to wrap up and when the timer is about to go off, but hope that they would be able to expand on their thoughts during the Q&A period. After that, they will be given the opportunity to respond to one another for 3 minutes. We have asked them to use this time to help clarify differences and similarities among their remarks. We hope that this will set the stage for a lively and respectfully focused Q&A with you. I will wind things down around 5:50 p.m. and allow for panelists to make some concluding remarks. We're planning to, we will let you all know at the end where we're planning to go to continue the conversation at a restaurant nearby. Okay, so on the panel. We've asked our panelists to respond to the following prompt. In spite of many different political currents and tendencies, the most significant question forming the left today is the issue of political party. In the wake of the failure of the social democratic turn of the Millennial Left and the Sanders campaign, the question of party for the left seems to have returned. This time taken up by a younger generation, inherited from and perhaps counter to their millennial counterparts, neo-socialist experiences. The return has taken place against the backdrop of an ongoing crisis of both the Democratic and Republican parties since the 2016 elections that the left has been forced to witness from the sidelines. On one hand, the Biden presidency and the lead up to the 2024 election saw a renewed emphasis on steering clear of politics and taking up struggles to organize socially, typically in the form of municipal organizing or mutual aid. In contrast, there was a trend to reconceptualize the Communist Party in the US, under the recognition that the civil social organizing, in the absence of a party, would be absorbed into capitalist politics. These forms recall an older question faced by the left, internationally, that goes all the way back to the Marxist dispute with the anarchists in the First International. What would it mean for the left to take political action today? However, the issue of the political party seems to generate more problems for the left than it solves. Forming political organizations appear indispensable for building a long-term perspective beyond the ebbs and flow of movements. Yet the role of a party in sustaining activity and discontents over time in the process of building towards a revolution has had, at best, an ambivalent legacy, often leading to the rationalization and institutionalization of politically ineffective strategies and giving cover to various forms of opportunism, reformism, careerism, and so on. Today, the idea of the political party could serve, not as an end in itself, but as a means for the left, through which the necessity of social transformation could be developed within society. It is difficult to envision for both theoretical and practically. And yet the current default, politics without parties, seems unable to do more than give sanction to the vicissitudes of which capitalism changes, but invariably persists. Worse still, without parties of its own, the left is forced to either passively or actively take places in the hopes of other parties. It appears there's no way for the left to escape the question of the political party. So in the order of the panelists that I listed, let's start with Alex.
Constantinople, 532 AD, the dawn of partisan political organizing, as well as the bipartisan status quo of today, had taken an initial form in what was known as the Demes in ancient Byzantium. Informal political advocacy groups that had begun as sports fandoms for the various chariot racing factions of the Circus Maximus in Constantinople, in which the crowd would fly the colors of their own political party and chariot racing team while chanting the word Nika, meaning victory, at their rivals. Over time, a bipartisan polarity had emerged. The two most prominent Demes became known as the Veneti, or Blues, and the Procini, or Greens, evolving into a complex social, financial, and public institution that eventually came to influence policy at the imperial court of Emperor Justinian, who would publicly attend the races where the crowds of the Greens and Blues would attempt to shout out their political sentiments to the emperor in the intermission between races. The illusion of a false bond between the people and imperial power was maintained by bread and circuses, as well as this institutionally legitimized pseudo-democratic spectacle between the Greens and Blues that maintained the illusion of influence on the emperor, and a false bond between the people and the elites, maintained by the. Oh my God, sorry, excuse me. It was finally called into question when Emperor Justinian declared he would execute two prominent leaders, one from the Greens and one from the Blues, for having incited a riot against high taxes and corruption of his financial ministers, such as John the Cappadocian. The reaction of the plebeian masses was unprecedented in the history of the empire, as the Greens and Blues took up arms together, unanimously demanding the abdication of Emperor Justinian by once again chanting the chilling battle cry, Nika, but now in a qualitatively new context, meaning overthrow, conquer, and perhaps, by a more generous modern translation, even revolution. Centuries later, we once again consider the timeless question of whether there could be a popular front for the masses as a whole that transcends the pseudo-democratic spectacles of bourgeois politics, at the risk of evoking a familiar cliche about the collapse of the Roman Empire and how the contemporary United States perhaps resembles that collapse. We have nevertheless made the comparison. We may make the comparison in not only the economic and geopolitical parallels between the United States and the late Roman Empire, but also in a similar breakdown in terms of political consensus, in which the masses, such as the Demes, the Greens, and Blues, have begun considering realignment among their material interests. Parties like the SPA of Eugene V. Debs and the CPUSA, founded by William Z. Foster, had become prominent during the financial crisis of the 20s and 30s. though quickly went into decline during the Red Scare and the Cold War McCarthyist purges, leaving no nucleation site for labor politics in the United States until perhaps the present day, in which questions of economic justice have once again come to the fore. History has shown us that the basis of any successful Communist Party lies not in the ideological doctrine or the persuasive power of its arguments, but by its real world historical practice and concrete development of the bonds between the working masses and the tools, means, and methods of production, which is to be conducted through an organization that exclusively represents the concerns of the revolutionary masses and their living material conditions. Yet the left-wing movement in the United States today has failed to make practical contributions in the formation of such an organization, and it is necessary to turn to the successes of past revolutionary movements to reconstitute the former strategies at the highest level of revolutionary history in the past century that have proven successful. At the inception of the dialectical method, it was Herder and Jacobi who had first posed the question of nihilism and criticized the detached stance of Kant's treatise on pure or theoretical reason in the 1780s, prompting a response from Kant in the form of a second critique aimed at the object of practical reason. It was from here that Fichte's subjective idealism would attempt to unify the passive and active faculties of thought, Schelling's objective idealism, which imposed that unity onto the duality of thought and nature, and finally Hegel's absolute idealism, which formalized critical philosophy as the dialectical unity of theory and practice, which Marx would declare to be the rational kernel of bourgeois philosophy in his afterword to the 1873 edition of Capital Volume 1. While the left is no stranger to composing elegant treatises on revolutionary theory, and what an ideological program for the party might be, what then constitutes the party's practical component? As history would show us, the practice of the left-wing party in its organizational structure was not to limit itself to the electoral spectacles of the Circus Maximus, but to behave like the equivalent of a standing army. I would now like to revisit, in relevance to this, a quote from State and Revolution with regard to the legacy of the Paris Commune and its significance for having answered the question of practice among the partisan members of the revolutionary left. Quote, "The first decree of the Commune, therefore, was the suppression of the standing army and its substitution for it by the armed people. This demand now figures into the program of every party that would call itself socialist. In light of recent events, we find ourselves in a position to ask whether Lenin's words still ring true today. In a period of unprecedented potential for left-wing revival, our leaders have not yet understood what it is that separates the party of the revolutionary left from bourgeois parties. Much has changed in the First World War, and yet one can still find wisdom in these words. As the individuation of the left, the revolutionary left, into its own autonomous political organ, as distinct from the Democratic Party, has never been more necessary in confronting the shadow and specter of fascism today. In the wake of recent elections, the radical left has been betrayed by the influence of the professional managerial class on politics. Despite the popularity of figures like Bernie Sanders, it has found itself with no voice in pursuing pressing issues of the current day, such as the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the imperialist war in Ukraine. To rediscover the political identity of the left demands a return to Lenin's original ideas of what separates the Revolutionary Party from the parties that strictly limit themselves to participation in the electoral process. The issue we find ourselves confronted with today yet resembles the crisis of the left that Lenin had faced with Kautsky at the Second International. The Party of the Revolution should not define itself by its success in bourgeois parliamentarian elections, or make that its primary goal, but rather it should strive to establish itself and assert itself as the most fundamental representative apparatus of the unions, the Popular Front, and the international labor movement itself. The conditions of the current day, such as the emergent multipolar world, in the wake of the 2022 Russian special military operation in Ukraine, a new world system resembling the contradictions Lenin had originally faced in World War I is slowly coming to the fore. The party is not merely a transitory historical event, but the foundational vanguard for the formation of a new kind of state, and thereby a new kind of social life. The purpose of the party is not to run an opinion poll or voter demographic analysis to gain the favor of these wealthy benefactors who have governed our politics hitherto, but its true purpose ought to be to build grassroots community organizations and institutions of worker power that will outlast the bourgeois state and its impending collapse, faced with the specter and shadow of world war and the looming incursions of fascism on our civil rights. In the task of the in the collapse of the neoliberal world system, the party must therefore not be limited to achieving mere tenure in the legislative body, but it must, as Lenin deemed necessary, smash the ready-hand machinery of the state and refuse to share power with the enemies of the working class. To quote State and Revolution again, the victorious party must maintain its rule by means of terror, which it will inspire in the reactionaries. Would the Paris Commune have lasted more than a day if it had not used the authority of the armed people against the bourgeoisie? Can we not, on the contrary, blame it for having made too little use of that authority? In light of Lenin's comments on authority, consider the controversial dilemma of whether there can only be one party for the revolutionary left. One party and many ideas. One party just as the masses only have one history. And it is the Communist Party that must speak truth to this history and meet the developments of that history. This is not an easy position to adopt for a nation that has spent the latter half of the past century being conditioned to antagonize Marxism-Leninism and the means by which it governs. It is of utter necessity that the one revolutionary party of the left not be strictly limited to the ideas and vision of any one given individual or living or historical revolutionary figure. Rather, it is the Communist Party that must be reconstituted under the current material conditions of the post-COVID era to discover the correct line which this party will follow. And while the ideas of the party are many, the party must itself be one. This is not to say that explicitly the ideals of historical Marxist-Leninist revolutionaries will have the final say in establishing the political party of the revolutionary left. Rather, it must reflect the distinct national and historical character and must contend not only with the various historical realities most embedded in the consciousness of today's left, and upon taking power, the party is to serve the role of what Lenin deemed the transition to lower stage socialism, where it would wield the power of the state to organize these masses and their disparate ideas through the method of democratic centralism. In summary, the American, and even the entirety of the Western left, has not reasserted its legitimacy in a manner that makes these goals achievable. And the most important historical precedent to reconstitute the one and only Communist Party of the United States under a mass line is to reinstate the method of democratic centralism and develop the correct line for our current material conditions. If you will bear with me for one final concluding remark from State and Revolution and the forgotten wisdom of our revolutionary forefathers. In revising the program of our party, we must by all means take the advice of Engels and Marx into consideration that in order to come nearer to truth, to restore Marxism, we must rid it of its distortions, to guide the struggle of the working class for its emancipation more correctly. And to conclude our discussion, we thereby propose that the question of practice in a political party for the left can be summarized in but a single word: Nika. Thank you.
Okay, next can we have Jeff?
Thank you for inviting me and to be here with this wonderful group of socialists. The subject is Party of the Left. I would add to that title, Reform or Revolution. What does revolution mean in the United States today? It means that we organize ourselves to remove the capitalist power that runs the United States and much of the world. It has state power through its duopoly. There are no fundamental differences between the Democrats and Republicans. Both of them preside over $1 trillion military budget. Both of them preside over a country that has 1,100 military bases in 100 countries around the world. Both of them preside over a 5 million member national security clearance agency incorporated into 18 different government agencies. Both of them provide over a total monopoly in the political arena, a total monopoly of the media, and thousands of nonprofits and so-called socialist communist parties that support the status quo. Just a side comment, for my entire lifetime and before, the Communist Party has supported the Democratic Party, whether it be the warmongering Vietnam Party of Lyndon Baines Johnson, Kennedy, and all other capitalist candidates. In one form or another, that is a fundamental break with working class politics, a break that arose in the socialist movement with the rise of Stalin and the Soviet Union. Right now, we're witnessing Trump and Musk redividing the previous tax and budget allocations to the super rich, but none propose anything fundamental in the system. Socialist parties, or revolutionary socialist parties, is our question before us. Our central and sole objective is to organize the working class majority to take state power, to abolish every one of the institutions that I mentioned they use to run the country. And the key lessons that we put forward are not new. They're the lessons of the 1917 Russian Revolution. Working class revolutionary government, not coalition capitalist government. The formation of disciplined, deeply rooted democratic centralist parties consisting of professional revolutionaries. Their watchword is working class power, working class independence versus capitalist power. How do we get there? First, one note to dispel the deep pessimism that has permeated most of the left. Someone I read a lot about, named V.I. Lenin, in late 1917, was rowing a boat on a quiet Swiss lake and then lecturing to small groups of students like we have here today. And he said to those students, I won't live to see the socialist revolution in Tsarist Russia. You, the young people, are the future. 9 months later, Lenin's party, persecuted, isolated, exiled, jailed, and murdered by the Tsarist autocracy, established the world's first worker state, established the first nation in history that abolished the oppression of its conquered peoples, its oppressed nationalities, withdrew from the imperialist war, established working class government institutions to run the country in the context of nationalizing the wealth of the country under workers' control. These are called Soviets. They provided the model for a new international because the old had capitulated to imperialist war, because the old in Russia, led by the Mensheviks and most of the anarchists at the time, had capitulated to a coalition capitalist government with the progressive bourgeoisie in the lead after the Tsar was murdered. How do we get from the dismal situation we face today, where there is deep working class anger everywhere because of the capitalist insults to working class life, to where we want to go? We start with the proposition that revolutionaries must champion every social struggle via united front, democratically organized mass mobilizations. These protests have the effect of not just in the street, but of convincing the working class in its confidence that we are the majority. It exposes the reformist who defaults. It establishes mass democratically organized, class-independent, mass-action united fronts akin to the Soviets, where the working class parties compete for the allegiance of the working class. What are some of the key issues today? Number one, against all capitalist wars, and there are 200 of them, all the same, that have existed over the last decades. No exceptions. Against the US-backed fascist-led war in Ukraine, against the war in Syria, in Libya, in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, in Cuba, in Palestine, Yemen, and everywhere else in the world where the United States has military bases. Abolish the military budget. Bring all the troops home now. Trillions for jobs, health care, the environment, not one penny for war. Full democratic rights for women, LGBTQR rights, Black and Latino rights, for everyone. Self-determination for all poor and oppressed nations, even if their leaders are capitalists, when they are under the gun for U.S. imperialism, we say U.S. out now. No to all U.S. wars against poor and oppressed people. All U.S. wars, intervention, sanctions, secret wars, special operation wars, U.S. private wars, CIA wars have to end. Any party that departs from this basic scenario has nothing to do with revolutionary socialism. Revolutionaries are optimistic about the future. We see the most difficult times, like I grew up in, the McCarthy era, which banned mass demonstrations and campus protests and free speech movement and imprisoned revolutionaries for their political views, give way to mass mobilizations of unprecedented scope. I was part of all those struggles and still am. My party was a central organizer of the millions who mobilized to bring the troops home now, where the reformists, including the communist parties of those days, which had 10,000 members, supported Negotiate Now. We did not grant imperialism the right to negotiate the future of any oppressed countries, then and today. Socialist Action led demonstrations of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, against the U.S. wars in Nicaragua and Central America and Grenada. We organized demonstrations of 100,000 against the Iraq War. We organized demonstrations of United Front demonstrations, democratically organized demonstrations, through the coalition that we founded, United National Anti-War Coalition. We organized 10,000 against the US-led invasion of Venezuela. We organized mass protests against the persecution of the Cuban people. And we still consider the Cuban model the most akin to the Russians, because the Cubans abolished capitalism, established a worker state, distributed the land of the country, unlike any other in the modern times, to the Cuban people in the largest land reform in the history of the world after the Russian Revolution. We support every effort to bring the troops home now and to build working class power. We reject any and all support to the Democratic Party, including the support traditionally granted by the Greens, by Green Party candidates, by Bernie Sanders, who supported Biden's war, who supported the U.S. imperialist budget, and advocated lesser evil politics in the electoral arena, and was regularly supported in his home state by the Democratic Party, by the Obama administration, that banned any Democrats ever running against them. Capitalism can never be reformed. There will never be a, quote, progressive capitalist candidate. Progressive capitalism, reforming the Democratic Party, are oxymorons. Revolutionaries need patience, but must be filled with optimism that the working class will rise to the occasion to assume its rightful place in history. It will be the majority party of the working class because workers are the majority of society.
Jeff, could you wrap up, Jeff?
Is workers' rule. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Amy. I am an organizer with the Democratic Socialists of America and its youth wing, the Young Democratic Socialists of America. And before I get started, Alex, I'd like to build off something you said. You said there needs to be only one political party. And I'm in full agreement with you there. While I would generally never quote him, his words are in this one and only this one instance correct. Benjamin Franklin said, "If we do not hang together, then surely we shall all hang separately." And on that, he was right. As we need to look at the issue of political parties in the left very carefully, because if we cannot unite together into a proper political party, we are not going to be able to make any change. Capitalism is going to continue, the world is going to continue to deteriorate, and we are not going to see anything come about without uniting of the masses. The problem is that we cannot unite if the parties and organizations that we are working under have significant and fundamental problems that stop them from uniting the masses. It's been mentioned by speakers from both of the speakers who have come up so far about previous communist parties. The Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, which later became the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the Chinese Communist Party, the Cuban Communist Party. These were all successful because they were able to unite the masses, because they were able to continue to advance the correct line on many issues and to take care of the struggles that they faced internally. In the modern day, we have not seen within the American sphere parties that can effectively do that. While I can definitely appreciate the efforts of modern organizers in the ACP or in PSL, they have come under fundamental issues with their party that have stopped them from being able to grow. This is not that their fundamental issues are democratic centralism. That is absolutely, from my perspective, necessary part once a good party has been established. But it's all these other issues that come together when forming a party, being able to have the correct line and to resolve issues within an organization that do not lead it to alienate the masses. One of the key things in that is actually having proper democracy. Democratic centralism within a political party needs to be democratic, and that has been an issue that many American parties have failed at. From an outside perspective, it's very easy to see the Russian and Chinese and Cuban communist parties as focusing more on top-level leadership. And in trying to replicate that in the United States, parties have continuously failed to reach the masses. Parties end up generally centralizing only around those who are in the initial membership and those who are the leaders of the organization at the start, and fail to actually become mass organizations as a result. This causes the political party to not be able to reach that critical mass of people, and if it does not do that within a reasonable time frame, as the Russian, Chinese, and Cuban communist parties did, it will fail. It may continue to keep existing. CPUSA technically still exists, but it will not be able to grow to the right size in order to actually become a critical mass of the masses and be able to lead a revolution. And that's something that is so fundamentally an issue with our modern parties. But it does also give us an insight into where we need to look, and that is with democracy among the masses. The members of a party and those who want to join a party need to be able to be engaged in the decision-making of their party. They need to be able to integrate themselves with parties and to not feel that they are on the outside being told what to do, but rather actively contributing to the party. This was a key thing that Lenin explored. Democratic centralism should not just be limited to, what the party leadership says goes. Democratic centralism requires first that the masses all come to the conclusion, and then they are bound to uphold it. If the party themselves makes it, then the masses did not get proper input on that, and they will be substantially disconnected from it and unwilling to follow it. At that point, if you try and then advance that line, you are simply engaging in left opportunism, because the masses were not involved and they did not have the ability to actually drive the party. They will not be able to carry forth those revolutionary goals, and they will fail. Now, DSA does not handle this perfectly, but we have a lot of better structures for doing this. At the 2023 convention, DSA really fundamentally reshaped itself. We became a political organization with a party-like identity. Now, there's differences in opinion among the various factions and caucuses of DSA about exactly what that means and how that should be carried out. But at a fundamental level, we are an organization that can start to form a party and can progress to the point of becoming a party that is focusing on organizing the masses and delivering immediate relief, then getting the masses into the organization through that. Once they are there, we keep that democratic structure key in order to continue to advance the organization and allow it to build. I joined OCDSA roughly a year ago now, to organize politically. I had been involved in other groups before that, but I joined OCDSA largely because of DSA's structure and the way it allows people to organize. As soon as I joined OCDSA, I felt like I could actually contribute. I wasn't just being given orders of what to do. I could actually help advance the goals of OCDSA and of DSA as a whole. I could actually contribute to the thought processes and contribute to the development of OCDSA and DSA as a whole's line. And that is just something that we don't see in a lot of modern political parties. PSL, for instance, if you join PSL, even after your 9-month candidacy period, at which point you are only being told what to do, you are not really an active participant in shaping the future of the party. Most of the party is still controlled by the people at the top. They automatically get 40% of the votes at party congresses. That is not a democratic system. That is a bureaucratic system where your only hope of democratic ideals being realized in the party is relying on strong party leadership and the hope that that will be able to carry things forward. And we have not, and while PSL has in some things been very successful, in many things they haven't, because ultimately we are all humans. We are not perfect, and trying to centralize all control into the minds of a couple leaders, even if they are the best among us, is not going to work. Continuous democratic input and the processing of that democratic input is necessary. One of the questions that we were asked to answer is, in what sense is a party different from a political organization? In my mind, a party is a form of political organization that has reached the point of being able to synthesize the ideas of the masses, grow to a critical mass of involvement, and then carry its ideas and its programs and its policies forward. DSA is not at the point of being at a critical mass yet, but neither are any current other organizations within the United States. We are not there yet, but DSA is at the point where it can start synthesizing from the masses, at least at many of the local chapter levels, and then begin to start pushing its work forward. We're definitely not at the point of having an armed revolution yet, but we have been able to achieve actual material things, both within the state apparatus and outside of it, that have materially changed people's lives and become the baseline for further growing the organization. Recently, for instance, in Seattle, Seattle just passed public social housing. That was done by the coordinated efforts of Seattle and Greater Puget Sound DSA members. That was not, oh, the state decided to do it, or, oh, we had an armed revolution because we already had this mass. No, it was because we have an organization that was growing, was able to achieve this step, and in doing that, excuse me, has substantially grown its membership. Seattle DSA's membership, last time I talked to them, is growing a couple % every day. That is an insane growth rate for any political organization, and it's the type of trajectory that we need to establish strong political parties. Another aspect of this is being able to actively engage in the struggle of various groups throughout society. Ultimately, we do not have a culture in most areas in the United States where people want to become politically engaged and involved. For most people, their political involvement is limited to voting in elections, if they do that at all. And that is just not conducive to actual material political change. But what in the US more people will do is be involved in things that directly affect them. Unions are a key example of this. Union membership is finally starting to increase again as people realize that unions are an effective way to organize their workplaces. So the question becomes, okay, we have this way that people are starting to become engaged. How can we build on that? I do admire that the work that some other parties have been doing to integrate with unions and try and support them, but ultimately their support is always from the outside, showing up to rallies, strikes, pickets, and helping them advance their goals. And while that may be great for short-term material change, it does not get them directly politically involved. That does not get them to join into the organization, to learn more, and to actively be involved in building a mass party. DSA's strategy is a little bit different. We still will do that key solidarity support work, but we also try and mesh ourselves in with unions. We don't try and take over the union, but we provide as much opportunity for connection with unions and their membership as possible, and as a result, when unions form and grow, their membership can join into DSA and grow both, because as DSA grows, it can further support the union. As the union grows, it can further support the growth of DSA. That was a key part of what allowed the Communist Party of the Soviet Union to succeed in its early days, despite all of the theoretical issues it faced. All right, yeah. It was able to do that because it could mesh directly in with the workers. It went directly to the workers and organized the councils around them. So even though it had all these other problems that would not be solved until later down the line, it could survive and form our earliest communist societies through labor. And it's not just labor, it's also with many other types of organizations. Student organizations are a big one as well. But that is the fundamental thing that we need to do, is have our organizations and eventually our party be able to mesh with these different areas of society to get people involved. Thank you.
Okay, and Tom. Oh, you're muted, Tom. Tom, you're muted.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, thanks for inviting me. I want to start out by making a distinction. I want to make a distinction between what I would call an ideologically specific organization, or an organization of a political tendency, and distinguish that from a political party. I think that ideologically specific organizations have a very useful role to play, or can play a very useful role, in terms of direct organizing, and also popular education work, educating people, about the nature of capitalism, the system that we're opposing, as well as doing the organizing work like building unions, building tenant organizations, this kind of thing. But I'll point out that historically, it's always tended to be the case that there's groups who agree, what in the cynical street we call a militant minority. People who are, let's say, active in the union, building a union, and they have a bespoke program. But there are other people there from other left-wing views, or other left-wing views. They are another different militant minority. So what you have to find is that you have to try to work out a common program, a common agreement that you can work together on, a united front. So there are always been multiple militant minorities. There always will be multiple minorities. But I think that these organizations, nonetheless, through their united fronts, through the work they do, can be a sufficient force to prevent ordinary resistance in capitalist society from simply getting absorbed back into capitalist politics. So I don't agree with the idea that a political party is necessary here. Now I want to distinguish the ideologically specific organizations from a political party. A political party is an organization that takes state power. It's to get people into, by elections or some other way, get in control of the government and run the state, run the society. Now, for a single ideologically specific organization to arrogate to itself the right to do that has a kind of implicitly totalitarian tendency. Because inevitably what happens is that there are other left-wing political tendencies outside that party. And they will end up there'll be a tendency to repress them. Okay, so I think that's one of and this is what the history of socialism in the 20th century showed. So I think that's one of the objections to the whole idea of a political party. I'll give another objection. The other objection is, well, what is the state? If this political party is to gain control of the state. Well, class oppression is inherent to the state. It's built into the state. It's built into the very subordination of public sector workers to the bureaucratic managerial hierarchies of the state. And that's why a party cannot be a vehicle of worker liberation or worker power. Rather, there's an alternative. Now, the libertarian socialist left has historically had an alternative. Our alternative is the class front. In my book, I call this the social lumen alliance. The idea here is that we build all kinds of mass organizations of struggle. We build unions. We build tenant unions. We build other kinds of resistance organizations, environmental groups, community groups. And we try to get these groups to be mutually supportive, support each other's grievances, and get them together and try to build a coalition, a united front of these organizations. That's the class front. So this is the way in which we can unite the working class into a struggle for its own power. So from our point of view, it's not a political party that we should be thinking of as taking power. It's the class front. It's the mass organization in their united front, their united organization. That's what needs to take power. So this means that the unions and the worker organizations need to think about the worker directly expropriating the capitalists directly and building industry federations through which workers can democratically self-manage the industries they work in. And, through the community organizations, the industrial federations, we're bringing these together into a social federation. And that's what replaces the bureaucratic state, that's what replaces capital, and it's backed up by the worker militia. And what we need to have in this situation, a revolutionary situation, the workers' militia has to have the dominant armed power in society, so that through its democratic control of this, through the unions, the other mass organizations, the working class can directly ensure that there's not some new, party state group that gets in and seizes power and takes power away from workers. As has happened in revolutions, numerous revolutions, where workers seize various industries and so forth. And then what happens? The party gets into power in the state, it takes them away, starts appointing its own managers, is the police power to do that. That happened in the Russian Revolution. Communists tried to do that in the Spanish Revolution. You know, and so the class front is therefore the alternative conception of both the strategy and where we want to go in building a very directly democratic form of socialism. And I think that the building mass struggle, mass organization from below is today exactly the way that we work against, we fight back against the current MAGA neo-fascist coup that's going on right now. Okay, the way to resist that is through the building up of more and more unions, the building up of more and more coalitions of unions and other organizations, other environmental organizations, community organizations, to build a coalitions and build up the disruptive mass actions through strikes, building towards general strikes, that kind of thing. That's how we build the fight back against. I mean, the MAGA paymasters are the billionaires. And basically, they want to blow up the U.S. Constitution, throw it away. All right, fine. You want to put that on the agenda? Then we'll replace capitalism itself. That's going to become on the agenda. So that's the way forward. It's through the direct building of mass organization from below, mass struggle from below, mass disruptive action.
So now I want to open the floor for the panelists to have 3 minutes each, just asking each other questions and some follow-ups. Maybe we could continue in the order that we started. So Alex?
Of course, yeah. So I would say I agree with Jeff that any party that dare call itself the party of the left must under no condition tail the Democratic Party and their support and endorsement for the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the imperialist war in Ukraine. And I indeed will also concede to Amy that there's no reason that a party of the left, such as the Communist Party or whatever party assumes the correct line that will take the revolutionary masses to victory, cannot form a voting bloc with parties like the Democrats. However, it is within the science of Marxism-Leninism, the traditions, the revolutionary tradition which has been passed from generation to generation. That tradition insists that it's important that under no condition the party attach itself to liberal, a liberal as a vehicle to attach itself to a vehicle of liberal bourgeois politics, because it is from this attachment that it loses its own essence. It is no longer a left-wing party. If the Democrats should one day wake up and reconsider that they too are no longer a left-wing party. And for this reason, the Communist Party, the Left Party, whatever you would call it, the popular front of the revolutionary masses, must insist on their own essence. And to cite a few historical examples of why it cannot be the case that there be, as much as I respect, the ideas of Donald Parkinson and Marxist Unity DSA, I come here in peace. I still do not think that we ought to, as Amy said, mesh with different organizations. I do believe the Revolutionary Party ought to be a distinct organization with its own essence. And this goes to a problem of what, and this has historically presented itself in the issue of the 1927 Shanghai Massacre, in which the CPC, the Communist Party of China, was betrayed by a coalition of the KMT fascists. And many parties that would call themselves democratic, liberal, even anarchist parties participated in the Shanghai Massacre and the betrayal of the Communist Party. And it's for these reasons the party must maintain its own essence, and it cannot defer its organizational authority to some other body. And and for this reason, I circle back to Jeff, that I wholeheartedly agree with what you said, and I believe we should build on those ideas and truly reconstitute the left-wing party in the United States as it had been in the days of William Z. Foster. And there is the issue Amy brought up of whether the party would ever grow to the right size. And at the ACP, we believe that, read my lips, there are no limits to growth. We believe that there indeed are moments, such as with the RSDLP and the CPC, where these parties were reduced to merely dozens of members. And even in the 1927 massacre, when everyone believed all hope was lost, Mao conducted the long march to the fortress of Yan'an and preserved the organ and the essence of the political, of the Popular Front and the revolutionary masses. Last I checked, I believe the ACP and the DSA were very close in followers on social media, Twitter especially, within 20,000 followers at least. And I believe that if the ACP is to be condemned because it cannot grow, I believe that goes for any other organization that would call itself the party of the left. And I believe that if the revolutionary historical tradition, which has succeeded in the past, is given a second chance, that it may well be able to succeed again.
Let's move to Jeff. Jeff, this is like 3 minutes of questions and answers for the panelists.
Thank you. The DSA claimed 100,000 members. In my opinion, 99% of those voted for the Democratic Party. The DSA has been entered by most of the left, or many on the left, because they understand that the DSA is an admixture of political groups with varying orientations, but none of them is to revolutionary socialism. The DSA is a multi-tendency group of liberal Democrats, reformists, revolutionaries, and members of other tendencies. It claimed 100,000 members, but most of the time its meetings are a dozen or two around the country. It will never be a revolutionary party, nor will any other party that supports the Democrats or has a core of its members who support the Democratic Party. My differences with Tom are the same historical differences with the anarchists. The Soviets were not workers' militias. The Soviets were a united front of the entire working class, the oppressed nationalities, the discriminated nationalities, the army itself, which went over to the Soviets, and the working class, which took over the factories. The Soviets were workers' rule in the form of every major oppressed section of society. They never sought to establish workers' militias. They armed the working class as a whole. And they were successful because their program was key to the unity of the working class. They gave the peasants the land in the largest nation on earth. They gave the workers control of the factories. They withdrew from imperialist war, and they established democratic, organized Soviets, where the Bolsheviks won eventually a majority of all of the Soviets, including the National Soviets, and voted to take power in the name of the entire working class, and they did. And they assigned Trotsky to lead the storming of the Winter Palace and the abolition of capitalism.
Jeff, could you wrap up? Yeah.
Indeed, at that historic day, Lenin and Trotsky sat on the floor of the Winter Palace and drafted the resolutions for workers' power, peasants' power, Soviet power, soldiers' power, that were approved by the Soviets, and the Soviets were multi-tendency, with the Bolsheviks having a majority. But others who participated in the revolution were given qualitatively important posts in running the country. It was a multi-tendency outfit, had nothing to do with the anarchists, the vast majority of whom went over to the Soviets because it represented their program. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, Alex, you say that that we should be giving these organizations a chance for growth. I wholeheartedly agree, and I think the ACP, all things considered, is a fairly young organization. I don't think we should discount it because it hasn't been able to grow despite being old, because it isn't old yet. The issue with the ACP is that you have maintained several lines that have ultimately been completely wrong. Your founder maintains so many lines that are directly incorrect and even on face value contrary with everything that socialists have developed over time, that you have alienated the masses. Anyone who Googles you for more than 10 seconds becomes disgusted with the ACP because of how many different, honestly horrendous stances the party has. I'm not saying you personally have those, but that has become an issue with the ACP as a whole. It has so many stances that have alienated the masses, even pro-fossil fuel positions, that the masses do not want to join the ACP, and as a result, it cannot be a vector for the revolution. Even if you were to change now, it would take a significant amount of rebuilding of trust with the people. But you didn't even have the trust in the first place, so they have no reason to rebuild it with you. Now, that does not mean that the DSA is perfect. Absolutely not. But we have worked to rebuild that trust. You said that it is disgusting that we would mesh with the Democratic Party. To be clear, I and most of DSA does not support meshing with the Democratic Party at all. When I say meshing with other organizations, I mean with labor unions, with student movements. I do not mean with political parties who are diametrically opposed to the left.
Like Donald Parkinson. Yeah.
I myself am a member of the Libertarian Socialist Caucus. We are decently coordinated with Marxist Unity Group. And while there are some who support the dirty stay within DSA, which is the continued meshing with the Democratic Party, that is not most DSA members. We are disgusted by the Democratic Party and do not want to be with it. And in fact, the 2023 convention party-like identity resolution was specifically to get away from the Democratic Party, to end the association with that. We can reflect on that. We failed after the 2019 and 2021 conventions through working with Sanders and the rest of the Democratic Party at that time, and we can say, look, we failed here. We are not going to do that. Most DSA members most current DSA members joined after the 2023 convention because DSA corrected their line there and was willing to admit that we were wrong. Now, you also mentioned social media. I don't think that social media following is a great way to measure how big your organization is, but I'm wrapping up. Just for fun, I looked it up. DSA has 333,000 members on Twitter, 333,000 followers on Twitter. You have 51,000, and on Instagram we have 155,000 versus your 622.
300,000, you said?
333,000 versus 51,000. And Jeff, while I didn't get to respond to you in time, most of my same responses apply for you as well.
May I be offered 30 seconds to respond or retort?
Yeah, okay.
If I get 30 seconds to respond back.
I am willing to grant that.
That's fine, but we just want to give enough time for people to ask questions. So if there's a way to, Amy, that you could maybe respond to it during the Q&A, that would be better. But 30 seconds, yours.
Of course. So you mentioned two things here. The first line was that you alleged that our leader did not follow a correct line. I would implore you to consider, how has the DSA ever followed a correct line? How has Bernie Sanders even, the beloved figure of the left, whose stances on the Gaza genocide and the Ukraine war were the opposite of this revolutionary historical tradition, and why the DSA is any more faithful to that tradition than ACP. Another thing you mentioned was the membership. Perhaps I was gauging on the Twitter followings, but you mentioned 300,000 versus 50,000.
That's the 30 seconds.
Sorry,
That's
give
the
me
30 seconds. That's the 30 seconds.
We asked what have these 300,000 accomplished in practice when compared to the ACP, who has assisted in the rebuilding of communities?
No, I get it.
What do these numbers mean in
Let's
practice?
Yeah, that's
So I think,
fine. No,
yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yes.
Let's try to weave this into the Q&A.
Of course,
I promise
yeah.
We'll have enough time to address everything, I promise. Okay, and then finally Tom, 2 minutes.
Okay, first of all, my understanding of socialist internationalism is that it's worker to worker solidarity. So we do not support regimes of class oppression, the imperialist regimes. We support struggles of workers in other countries. So in the case of Ukraine, there's a reason why the socialist and anarchist groups there are supporting the military struggle for the resistance against the imperialist aggression of Putin, right? It's an existential struggle for them, for the survival of their communities, the survival of their people, to not become slaves to Putin's oligarchic fascist state. And, so I totally oppose Jeff and other campus statements I heard here on that point. Also in response to Jeff, he makes a number of mistakes. First of all, in the Russian Revolution, there was a workers' militia that had 300,000 members until the formation of the Red Army. Secondly, as far as the Soviets are concerned, yeah, the Bolsheviks were fine as long as they could use them for, like a jumping thing to get into power, trampoline. Because once they got into power, it's a different story. Because in the June 1918 Soviet elections, according to the historian who wrote The Bolsheviks in Power, the Bolshevik Party stole the election. They gave to themselves 300 delegates they were not allowed to. If they had not done that, the majority would have arrested the left SRs and SR Maximals. Okay? And also, the Bolsheviks did not give the land to the peasants. There was a revolution in June, in the summer of 1917, where the peasants themselves took the land. They took it back from the land. So that's just a false history there. Also, no one here has talked about green unionism, so I'm going to put in a push for that. That's my group's main focus right now. There's people who are not, there's this out there, this global warming crisis going on. Nobody here has talked about that. And in fact, there's a growing trend worldwide now of workers in their unions resisting the environmentally destructive activities of their employers. And because this environmental destruction, this environmental dissipation, is inherent to the logic and nature of capitalism, this is implicitly an anti-capitalist struggle. And therefore, this is exactly why my group is focused especially on promoting green unionism. And I think that this is has to be an essential piece of how we view the current situation.
Okay, I want to open the floor to the audience to spend the rest of our time together on questions for our panelists.
I have a question about. You should probably stand up and speak loudly.
Speak loud. So
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Hello. I have a question about. The nature of the party's leadership over the masses, right? There's a question of should we be, as the left, just kind of aggregating the political demands that are already existing within people, or raising their level of consciousness? And I wanted to see how you all considered the idea of consciousness in, the role of the party, right? Thank you.
Paris.
Yeah, that's for the entire panel, right?
It's for
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. I believe that we have been accused, especially ACP's leadership has been accused of, not maintaining the correct stance on renewable energy, to which I would simply defer you to point 6 of the ACP's program that the American Communist Party stands for the development of all renewable technologies and renewable energy technologies, and including nuclear fusion and other possible deterrences to environmental contradictions. With regard to what you said about raising the consciousness of the masses, the method for doing this has already been established. in the revolutionary tradition, the dialectical method of Marx and Engels at the afterword to Capital. Marx said that he extracted from Hegel the rational kernel of bourgeois philosophy, which was the dialectic of Plato and Socrates, to engage in debate and elevate both parties, Aufhebung, synthesis, to a higher level of understanding. And it's true that perhaps some of you might find our leadership's opinions today to be a tad problematic in this or that direction. But this would be to condemn the party as a result of this would be to take a metaphysical view of history, that there are things that are eternal and unchanging, eternal unchanging ideas that don't change with the development of reality. And I believe that the views of our leadership as events unfold will change to reflect this elevation of consciousness, not just within the party, but within the leaders themselves. And I wholeheartedly agree that the task of the Communist Party should be to present the masses with this dialectical method so that their consciousness, too, can be elevated, like our leaders and our party.
Yeah, so in developing the consciousness of the people and in developing leadership, the party should be the people who are in the party. The party should be the result of the synthesis of the masses. And so you say, oh, you hope that your leaders can develop, and you criticize criticisms and discounting of your party based on your leadership as metaphysical. I have to fully disagree there, because the ACP has centered its leadership as the exclusive body, the exclusive part of the party for making decisions on policy and on the ACP's line. In DSA, the masses come together to synthesize that line. We do not leave it to just a select group of leaders to do that, because that puts too much faith and trust among a small group of humans who are fallible. We need to be constantly synthesizing, not just based on how some few people synthesize it, but on the masses, and working to educate all of the masses so that that synthesis can continue to improve.
Minute to respond each.
Can we get Tom and Jeff first?
Of course, yeah.
To also speak. Yeah. So Tom or Jeff? Tom or Jeff, do either of you want to talk about the role of consciousness? Yes, Jeff, please, yeah.
Working class consciousness has always been a product of struggle. When the working class is under attack, it looks for solutions. If those solutions are offered by a deeply rooted revolutionary party that has a history of championing working class struggles, they move forward. If they are commandeered by reformists who advocate support to the Democrats, they are sidetracked. That's why I mentioned that part of the Democratic Party apparatus is the myriad NGOs that are funded by corporations to votes into the Democratic Party. I hear what the comrade says about dialectical materialism, Marx, Engels, Hegel, the dialectical method, synthesis, and all of those other nice Marxist-sounding words. But none of them are sufficient to obliterate the fact that the American Communist Party is the Democratic Party for 70 years, or as long, or until Stalin came to power in the Soviet Union. So he quotes William C. Foster, Earl Browder, all the other Stalinists who ran the Communist Party, including the modern-day Gus Hall. So all the dialectical language you use doesn't suffice. And as far as Tom is concerned, about historic, it's about the role of the anarchists of the Russian Revolution and negating the Russian Revolution and its institutionalization in the Soviets, the most democratic forms that ever existed. he has misrepresented revolutionary history from reform to the role of the anarchists, to the totally incorrect view that the Bolsheviks usurp power.
Tom, you were gonna, yeah, please.
Yeah, I think that the way in which class consciousness develops, Jeff is right, it does develop struggle, but not just through struggle, but through solidarity, because I think that if people don't see other people being willing to support other people in struggle, they're not going to think that they can do anything. The solidarity is an essential piece of the process of class formation, of developing class consciousness. Because the only class formation is developing in the working class the power to actually change society. And that does require development of class consciousness, but also class organization and the ability, the capacity for action, and building it and the change of aspirations that comes about as people see they have power to change things. That's the basis for the change of consciousness. Class formation is a Marxist concept, but it's one that anarchists disagree with. As to all this dialectical bullshit, that's just obfuscation. That's what dialectics is. It's a way that people obfuscate and cover things over and don't want to say things in clear, plain language.
Let's give you, and then we'll go three of you.
Okay. Hello. Thank you for being here. So I like how Tom provided a good definition of a party as an organization that is aiming to take state power. My question doesn't really apply to Tom because I don't think he probably doesn't believe this. But I was wondering if you could explain to me, the party people can explain to me why the party is necessary. Why is it necessary for socialists to take power? Jeff, you kind of, I guess, you cited the Bolsheviks as like an example of kind of how a party really contributed to, I guess, progress in socialism. But say, like, why would we need a party today?
Yeah, I can answer that very simply, which was that we simply look at how the party people, as you said, relate to the direct democracy people in practice. And in practice, what we have found was that leftist organizations, there's a problem with what we consider leftist, which is that as Tom said, it's true that all these words, these Marxist-sounding words, dialectics, they mean nothing unless realized in practice. And who was realizing this in practice? The actual fruits of their methods was the party. And the party, ACP has been criticized for, like Amy said, just being the party as an exclusive group of individuals. And why should we give these exclusive individuals, let's say, unjustly weighted say in the workings of the left? And I simply just defer to what has occurred in Lenin's struggle with the Second International, which was that we all have this inherent idea that the masses ought to drive the party. But Lenin said he would most respectfully disagree, that what he found in practice was that you cannot expect your everyday working person to assume responsibility for their family, for their children, for their husband or wife, for their and then go beyond their working day, which was at the time in Lenin's day 12 hours or longer, and then go beyond that to assume responsibility for organizing the masses as well. And this is why historically the members of communist parties, yes, they have come from bourgeois families, and they have decided to betray their own class and devote their free time and energy and ideas and will to building up this party in a way that's, yes, asymmetric and does not equally distribute power in direct democracy among the masses. But what has this led to in practice was that it was hard to infiltrate the Communist Party. It was hard for the Tsarist government to take it down because it was so exclusive, because it was so small. Everything that is a criticism of the party is its greatest strength. The fact that it was difficult to penetrate this party. And this is why Lenin said that the Communist Party was not to be composed of the average working person. They may be members, but not cadre. Rather, he said that the party was to be composed of the most advanced sections of the working class to direct the interests of the masses and direct their self-organization in what Mao called the mass line. And I would say that in relation to the party and direct democracy, this is how they relate, which was that communism follows the wisdom developed by the dialectic in Plato's Republic, whereas direct democracy follows the metaphysical ideas of Plato's rival, Democritus, who believed in the atomization and particularization of not just reality, but society and also politics. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I believe that you have some fair points there, and to an extent I agree. But you also are leading into this false dichotomization of either we have the dialectic-based party in the view of ACP, or we have this metaphysical-based direct democracy, and that's just not the case. There are different levels of involvement and capacity that and capacity for involvement that one can have when one is entering into a political party. Within YDSA, Titan YDSA steering committee, we make a lot of the day-to-day decisions, and ultimately, while we had a recent case, for instance, of someone who tried to come in with very wrong ideals that were harmful to the chapter, and it was not, and while the steering committee helped the chapter to deal with that, it was ultimately the membership itself that was able to deal with them and get them out to prevent that infiltration. You create this false dichotomy of either everything is an exact direct democracy or is an ACP-style party, and that's just not the case. The correct solution here is to continuously involve people is to continuously involve people at the level at which they can be involved, and to continue to educate them, to build them up in terms of their capacity to be within the organization.
Jeff, did you want a chance to respond? Yes.
Yes. We're trying to discuss the party again. And one proposition that Tom mentioned or implied was that parties are inherently totalitarian, and we need an alternative to parties. The real question is what happened to the Russian Revolution? And the answer, if there is an honest rendition of history, is that despite its great achievements, including ending the imperialist war that took the lives of millions, including initiating the largest land reform, initiating legislation for gay liberation that was among the first in the world, including trans liberation, and establishing a system of workers' democracy, we go back to my starting point, and that is the relatively isolated, poor Soviet republic had the combined power of both sides in an imperialist war who invaded the country, who fought against the land reform, who murdered the leadership, who tried to restore Tsarism. Bolshevik Russia, isolated, embargoed, beleaguered, and invaded, was not able, although they tried to spread the revolution. They sent their best representatives to Germany. They made a revolution in Hungary. They did their best, but they couldn't overcome the combined forces of imperialism. Today, we're confronted with a not too dissimilar problem. We are trying to make a revolution in the state that is the most powerful the world has ever seen, with the largest combined repressive, military, murderous, genocidal apparatus the world has ever seen. In order to succeed, we have to win the vast majority of not only the people of the United States, but the world. That's why we need a democratically organized, deeply rooted, mass revolutionary party everywhere. That's what I've devoted my life to. One of our comrades on the panel said she's been fighting for socialism in the DSA for a year. I've been fighting for revolutionary socialism via my party and its once revolutionary predecessor for one whole lifetime, almost 70 years. And I've learned a few things from the mistakes of previous revolutionaries. But the mistakes did by the Bolsheviks in 1917 were exemplary, in my opinion, as was the example, and still is, of the Cuban Revolution. Despite its deformation and bureaucracy, it maintained its socialist nature of the economy and a large number of the democratic institutions that have been beleaguered by imperialist embargo, blockades, interventions, wars, secret wars, and assassinations.
Okay,
Before you go, I have to head out. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Tom, did you want to respond?
In a minute.
Okay. You had a question, and then I'll come to you next. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, what are some ways we can either penalize or resist the grip that corporate elites have on our government? And for example, like Bush's war in Iraq, lobbying for Halliburton, and Trump and Musk's coup d'etat democracy.
I wholeheartedly agree that this should be the primary hurdle that Party for the Left, the Revolutionary Left, is to overcome, is how in this age of mass digital technologies and the Fourth Industrial Revolution, a party is supposed to conduct its underground business in a society where every action and every word is surveilled. And while this was possible for Lenin, despite all the failures mentioned by Jeff, while this was possible for the Bolsheviks to do it through underground newspapers, it's much more difficult for a party like the DSA to conduct any business that would be deemed controversial by the bourgeois class. And it's for this reason that we must learn to innovate and not to simply let the minds of the dead weigh upon the living, like the revolutionary tradition of the past century. Of course, it did not succeed. They did their best, Jeff is right, and they did not succeed. And we need to learn from those failures, but also from the successes, and adapt this process to our modern digital age. How are we to organize under the pressure of surveillance and mass digital technology? And the ACP has sought to overcome this hurdle by organizing the party based on blockchain technology, encryption, and decentralized organization. It's not true that the leaders of the party ought to be this covert elite, and indeed that was the weakness of the Bolshevik party in the past, as Jeff has mentioned. Jeff has mentioned that the party was not, in fact, a democratic centralist like it claimed to be. And there were indeed pressures and excesses in Stalinism and Maoism brought on by the urgencies of the Great Patriotic War and Japanese imperialism that led to these excesses. And it's from these failures that we need to learn how to build a more effective way of coordinating. And ACP is trying to do this. ACP is not trying to repeat the ideas of the dead, but to add to them, to improve them, to develop them through the dialectical method, which is much more than just a fancy Marxist language. It's a practice. It's a way of life.
Yes, Tom?
Yeah, I agree with the previous speakers' emphasis upon both decentralized organization and encryption. I think it is true, and it is going to be a serious problem with, under the what I expect to be increasingly repressive environment. Since we need to build mass organizations, unions, there's already problems there. If you look at, say, the kind of severe surveillance regime that Amazon maintains in its warehouse, or these AI computer monitoring and video surveillance. The question is, yeah, we have to need methods of how to get around that, right? And I think that decentralized organization, clandestine organization, is part of it as well as encryption.
Okay, Jeff, did you have anything you wanted to respond?
Well, the history of the world shows that no capitalist technology can keep the truth from alone. Because the working people is Capitalism has no solutions to their problems other than repression, deindustrialization, new McCarthy era. I predict with certainty, as we did with the free speech movement in the 60s, that the repression that they're trying to introduce on campuses to ban student solidarity with Palestine will be obliterated when young people find their way into the streets again in defiance. The history of every revolutionary progressive struggle in the world is working people defying oppression and fighting for their rights. If revolutionaries are at the center of those fights, unifying them in the streets in mass action, which the ruling class cannot repress for long, if they find their way to a leadership that expresses their solidarity, we're in for historic changes, the kind of historic changes that Lenin, rowing a boat on a Swiss lake, predicted he would not live to see. And yet he did live to see. He returned to Tsarist Russia and announced to a shocked audience of social democrats, reformists, and left-wing capitalists on a stage before thousands of people, he said, all power to the Soviets. And everybody turned around and said, Lenin's gone crazy. All power to the working people? My God, we still live under a Tsarist army, Tsarist repression, Tsarist institutions, and a Tsarist installed government. And Lenin wanted to establish a new society where working people ruled. 9 months later, he was successful. Not because he was smart, but because his program on every key question in the revolution was deeply absorbed by the life experience of the Russian people, who rose to their revolutionary fervor and took power. They tried to keep that power in the face of a worldwide imperialist intervention. Both sides of the U.S. World War I invaded Russia to destroy it. And they survived it, but at great cost. They lost tens of thousands of their finest cadre, the young Bolsheviks who went to the French, to fraternize with the soldiers of Germany and the invading countries, in part successfully. They won over the armies of the world, and they defended the initial great kings of the Russian Revolution. This took a great toll, as it will with anyone who challenges capitalist austerity, war, faces poverty. Ruth never voluntarily cede power or its authority. It's our job to organize the mass of working people democratically through their own Soviet-type institutions to bring in a new society, not in backward Tsarist Russia, where 90% of the population was peasant, but in the most advanced country with the largest concentration of workers in the world, in alliance with the solidarity of workers everywhere. That's our basic program.
Okay, from the front, and then we'll go to the center, and then I'll take questions after you.
Yeah, so thank you guys for the lively discussion so far. So I have a question for Tom and Jeff, and then also one for, is your name Rob?
Alex.
Oh,
Yeah.
Alex, I don't know.
No
why I
worries.
said Rob. Yeah. So Tom and Jeff, it seems much of the discussion, or especially earlier with you guys, there's been a disagreement over the Soviets and the workers' militias and also anarchism in the Russian Revolution. I want you guys to put yourselves in the shoes of young people in the audience and maybe answer the question, why should we care about this, your guys' disagreement? What are the stakes of it? given your guys' substantial life experience in both organizing and also personal study. Like, I think much of the earlier discussion, you guys took it for granted that such a disagreement mattered to young people like us today, whereas I don't think that's immediately evident. And then for Alex,
Yes.
How will you in the ACP sustain yourself in the second Trump term and not burn out, both at the level of what you do politically and also personal psychology? Because obviously a lot of people in the past have burned out, both in the 20th and 21st centuries with new party project ventures. So what specifically about the ACP in 2025 uniquely positions you and your party to avoid the fate of burnout? So
Absolutely. I'll answer very quickly. You had one question there and then a second question. I'll answer them both really quickly.
Yeah.
The first question was, why should you care about our petty disagreements? From your eyes, we're just a bunch of old burnouts arguing over tiny distinctions. I do believe these distinctions matter, because a revolutionary organization like a left-wing party is a place where you are allowed to have ideas that are not accepted by the dominant regime and the ruling class. It must be a place for those ideas to thrive. And the reason for our disagreement is that you will not, at least from the perspective of ACP, is that in the DSA, you will not find any ideas that already don't exist among the Democrats. No ideas are being discussed there that already are not being discussed among the Democrats, such as the followers of Bernie and AOC. The purpose of a party, it's not a social club, it's not a game. And this leads into your second question. A party, the way you do not burn out is you must understand that it's not a social club. It's a serious commitment. You have to be willing to sacrifice everything. And the vanguard party of Lenin, as Jeff said, these were people willing to put everything on the line, put all their skin in the game, and sacrifice everything for a cause higher than themselves. And what did the DSA do this year? They had a singles mixer, a dating mixer for people to get together and find boyfriends and girlfriends. That's a game. This is not high school. This is serious. And ACP, we can have our disagreements in the end. This will not burn us out if we have disagreements with another individual. Ideologies don't matter if they do not translate in practice. And the way you keep a party together, like you said in your second question, is to focus on practical results, to put your ideological differences aside and unify theory with practice. None of it matters unless you can put aside your theories and work together with someone who disagrees with you. And I may have disagreed with Amy, but I'm willing to put aside our differences and build a popular front. But first, we must establish a space where ideas can be discussed that are not allowed in the mainstream. There must be an encrypted space, secured by blockchain, where the masses can act, they can coordinate, they can discuss things that are not that you would never hear the DSA even entertain, let alone follow through with any revolutionary activity. So we may have huge numbers and differences. Amy mentioned 50,000 versus 300,000. But what have the 300,000 accomplished? Other than, a singles mixer, dating, socializing? We can do that here at the university. What has the ACP accomplished with our minimal numbers? Hurricane relief. Hurricane relief for the people in North Carolina and Virginia and Georgia. The Hurricane Helene. Relief for the people struggling with the LA fires. Organizing mutual aid and community aid to the people who were made homeless by those fires. Which has been failed to be addressed by the incompetent local governments as well as the federal government. ACP believes in results, and we're willing to work with anybody who disagrees with us. But to not burn out, they must be willing to put everything on the line and come to a space where dangerous ideas can be discussed.
Okay, so let's have Tom and Jeff. Yeah, Tom. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree that it really doesn't matter. I mean, it's a totally dead idea. People should just ignore it. The problem is that there, as you can see from people, you're advocating it. That there are still small groups of people around who are pushing this dead, obsolete, authoritarian version of state socialist politics. And I think that I only, critique it because it needs to be critiqued. I think the way forward is through democratic mass self-organization, through building unions that workers directly control, self-managed unions, building worker committees, building tenant unions, building environmental groups that will support corporate actions against the environmentally destructive actions of employers, building alliances among community organizations and unions, building the real democratic struggle from below, the actual struggle of people, and within the working class, framework and communities. So yeah, Leninism, I think it's a dead idea, I think it's a mistaken idea. I only talk about it because you guys bring it up and keep pushing it.
Okay, Jeff?
Well, I think the question is a good one to begin to conclude this excellent exchange. Tomorrow, Socialist Action has a membership. The number of old timers like me, 4 years old. And it includes a number of brand new young people who are in their early 20s or just out of high school. How can we bridge the gap between the experiences of a layer of older comrades who've been through the McCarthy era, the Vietnam War, the fight against Stalin, Nicaraguan Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, and every other struggle, the Iraq War, US wars, and now a new McCarthy era. How can we bridge the gap between what we've learned from experience and what the young people today are experiencing? They've never heard of any of these things. That's a huge gap to bridge. But unless we can explain the history of struggle, its lessons of victories and defeats, to the oncoming revolutionaries, we have nothing. We're worthless. So the purpose of the Revolutionary Party and my opening remarks was, number one, explain the power of the class enemy. Its enormous, unprecedented military power, cultural power, its technological power, its CIA power, its 5 million paid agents who have national security clearance who exist to undermine us. And when just one of them or two, like Julian Assange, whose defense we championed, and Snowden, Edward Snowden, are persecuted to the high heavens because they revealed a minuscule amount of the truth of the horror of US wars, just imagine what they can do when they set the entire repressive apparatus on us. So, in order to challenge the capitalist beast, we need to build a massive, deeply rooted, revolutionary, and democratically organized revolutionary party that champions every struggle, helps them grow, and increase class consciousness to the point where they are a formidable force in the streets in the United States and the world. Today we have a contradiction between the mass worldwide sentiment against the US orchestrated genocide in Palestine, which threatens to destroy any hope for a Palestinian state and literally incorporate Gaza as a private Riviera for the Trump administration and the US ruling class. As Trump has said, we have that contradiction between mass hatred of that project and a still relatively low level of fight back in the United States, where the initial layer have retreated somewhat from defense of the Palestinian people. So there is no solution, in my opinion, other than to build a democratic revolutionary party, which is the way the labor movement was built, the feminist movement was built, the civil liberties movement in the United States to destroy McCarthy. Every social struggle was never given to us by the ruling class. It was fought for. We have to learn the lessons of the victories and defeats. And the main lesson of defeat is subordination to capitalism and export. Join us.
Okay, one other question. Yes.
So I've heard, I think each one of you guys like use the term democratic to kind of say why your tendency or your perspective is among the best. So I kind of wanted to ask you guys, what do you think the relationship between democracy and a socialist or anarchist party should be?
Right. So you're right. We all did discuss the word democratic, except for me. I didn't use the word democracy. I used the word democratic centralism. Well, which is it? Is it decentralized or centralized? They're opposites. Why am I using a conjunction of the idea of democracy and decentralization coupled with, like the notion of executive leadership? Like they seem to be at odds, but really, when you look at it, they're not. Sometimes one of these things fails, and sometimes the other fails. Sometimes one of these things succeeds, sometimes the other succeeds. The point is to discover the correct line, discover the correct line that would fit the material conditions of our age. The correct combination of democracy and centralism. And Tom mentioned that Leninism is a dead idea, and we at the ACP wholeheartedly agree that Leninism is a dead idea. But we at the ACP, surprisingly, do not believe in ideas that are eternal and unchanging. We do not believe that in being governed through ideas. We believe in being governed through a method that incorporates the successes and failures of opposite ideas, and then uses them to build new ideas. Then exhausts those ideas, and so on. It's not about ideas, it's about a method. And democracy is an ever-changing idea, like the Greek philosophers believed. And we at the West have adopted this eternal, unchanging idea, and now we hold it that it's never to be questioned, like religion, like ideology. It's unquestionable. Like you cannot question democracy. You cannot point out its failures, and where it has failed in building a revolutionary movement, and failed in discussing ideas that really need to be discussed, and failed in preventing the genocide in Gaza. All the democratic socialist leaders capitulated. And this is a problem with democracy. But I don't want to go to the other extreme and become a monarchist, right? We don't want to go to the other extreme and be like a king ruling over, like the Communist Party is supposed to be some kind of nobility or aristocracy ruling over the people. This too is a flawed idea, just like democracy. And when we say we believe in a process, the process is to investigate these extremes and extract from them what is useful in our time. Tom is right that Leninism is a dead idea, and even Marxism is a dead idea. That's why in the 1930s, Stalin called it Marxism-Leninism, to indicate that the theory has changed, that revolution is possible in peasant, quasi-feudal societies. In the 1960s, it changed again. There's Marxism, Leninism, and Maoism. It will change in the future. It will change with us. The ideas of our leaders will change. Our policies, our political program will change. The way we recruit new members will change. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus once said, "The only constant is change." And I find that synonymous with the only constant is hope. Hope that things will not remain the same forever, and that there are no eternal, infallible ideas, like democracy. It has its strengths and weaknesses, and each of those must be pointed out and used to create new ideas and new methods that would reflect the material conditions of our contemporary era.
Tom or Jeff, did either of you want to respond to this question on democracy? Yes, Jeff?
Well, we've heard this term democratic centralism, and I haven't heard a good definition of it. Revolution socialists consider democratic centralism to be nothing more than the application of the scientific method to human existence. My party is based on the cumulative experience of revolutionaries from the time of Lenin and Trotsky, Marx and Engels and others. We've drawn conclusions from their writings and integrated the fundamental theoretical political content into our daily functioning. They are exemplary of the ideas I've presented. Opposition to all imperialist wars, self-determination to oppress nationalities, war, at break with the Democratic Party. Every one of these ideas is a Marx concept that has been hammered out in debates, discussions, splits, fusions in the revolutionary movement since the time of the Russian Revolution and before. Democracy in the party, in our party, means full democratic exchange and debate, no matter what your opinion is. It means that any idea proposed by a rank and filer or the central leadership is subject to discussion and debate and revision in every branch in the party. After that discussion period, like any scientific proposal, the test of life, the test of experiment, the test of practice determines the truth, the falsity of the ideas under debate. In our party, we vote on the ideas. And if there is a majority and minority on the ideas proposed to the branches across the country, we grant automatic proportional representation to both sides, to a majority or minority or whatever. And at that point, we elect delegates to the convention. And the delegates representing the full party debate again and decide which idea is most applicable to the ideas that the party is confronting in the real world. The experiment is to give the ideas a test in the real world and to allow the majority to test its ideas, as any scientific experiment is based on the test of the experiment of the hypothesis of the ideas to uncover basic scientific truth. That is, we allow the majority to test its ideas in life. In the mass movement, in the anti-war, feminist, LGBT movement, which ones best correspond to the interests of the majority? And if we're a healthy party, and if we're deeply integrated into all the struggles that I mentioned, those ideas will prove us right, and we will benefit and grow along with the movements. And if we are mistaken, we are obligated to change the ideas, to modify them, as any scientific organization always does. But democratic centralism is not some kind of powerful love exercised by a party bureaucracy of the Stalinist type. It's a method to determine the truth of our ideas. What other method is there in life other than practice? Well, the alternative method is worse. And that is, you go through all the democratic discussion and debate, and then every party to the debate and every idea is allowed to present itself in public. Well, if that's the case, what the hell should we have a discussion and fight? Why should we have written debate over ideas when the debate is over? Everybody goes out into the, quote, real world and carries out their own line, if not an opposite line. It's simply the democratic centralism, it's simply the scientific method applied to the real world. That's the real Marxist method, to test ideas in practice. And if they're wrong, according to Marx, Engels, Lenin, Trotsky, and any other serious revolutionaries, they're changed by the test of life. There is no cult of personality and no automatic leadership right to rule the party in a revolutionary party. The tragedy of our time is that Stalin twisted and distorted those ideas, distorted the fundamental ideas of the Russian Revolution, democratic centralism, and Marxism. We want to bring those back to life. That's our basic thrust.
Thank you, Jeff. I want to ask, maybe we could do two questions, maybe one quick question, and the final question I want it to be the closing remarks. So I'd like to ask each of our panelists for the second question to just also conclude your ideas and what we've talked about for today. Just use that as conclusion. Is it a quick question? Or will it be the final?
I hope so.
Which one, the final?
No, let's do the final.
Let's do.
Tom, I want to talk about democracy.
Oh, Tom, yes, sorry. How about, yes, okay, then we'll go to you for the final question. Tom, yes, please.
Oh, okay. Well, I think that democracy actually flows out of freedom. It's a consequence of that. And it's like one scientific hypothesis, of course, that humans do have a nature. We have, for example, the inherent capacity to learn things and acquire abilities, and to converse with each other, and to cooperate and deliberate together to make decisions together. And so if it's a decision that has a collective impact on a whole group of people, right? Then you have this deliberation, and then if people don't agree, we'll do the vote, and it's majority vote. And then, well, that gets carried out, because that's the will of the majority, okay? And that's an aspect of self-management of any mass organization. Construction needs to be built in spaces. Any kind of organization has to be democratic. So that's what democratic means. It means self-managed by the members. The people who are members of that organization, part of that movement, they control it. So, I mean, that's how that's why I think that democracy is in fact essential. And I think it does fall out of actually scientific hypotheses concerning what human nature.
Yeah. Thank you all for a very spirited discussion, and I appreciate the philosophical retrospective from Alex. I definitely would agree that fight against philosophical nihilism is
Philosophy major?
on
No?
the agenda.
Sciences? Okay.
But my question is, so these ideas definitely sound very dangerous,
Yes.
and they would sound dangerous to other governments in case your party or the class front is to succeed. So my question would be, how are you looking to the possibilities of international cooperation? Because in the case of success, definitely you would come under threat of war, under heavy pressure from all around, as you know from history. So how are you looking forward to cooperation or confrontation with the powers that be?
Right. So there's a saying by Mao, one divides into two. One divides into two. What does that mean? It means you have one idea, and there doesn't seem to be any internal inconsistencies with it. And then suddenly, there's an event, a scientific event, and you realize this idea is not actually consistent at all. In fact, there's opposing ideas. When Mao drew this phrase, this slogan, from the Communist Party's collaboration with the KMT against the Japanese. Like, you are fascists, we are communists, but we must unite against the Japanese imperialists who pillaged the city of Nanking and worse. We must put aside our differences and adopt this common Chinese line. But then, when the Japanese went on the retreat, disagreements started to emerge. Disagreements that were not present at the time of the alliance. The Chinese people thought, like, well, we've finally gotten together and we've beaten back the imperialists, so what now? This is the essence of science. And Jeff mentioned that it's in his like Jeff mentioned that the Marxism is the scientific method. It's very correct. It's we do not follow an idea, we follow a process. And this process in physics, it's the standard model. In biology, it's a punctuated equilibrium and evolution. In social science, it's dialectical materialism. And so ACP, I understand you are referring to ACP's ambassador, Chris Halali, who has been traveling the world internationally. Chris Halali, the High Bailiff of the state of Vermont, has established connections with the KPRF in the Russian Federation, the Communist Party of Kenya, the Communist Party of Palestine, and among many others. And obviously there is the question of what will happen if historical events continue to unfold the way they are. Will our party ever come into conflict with one of our friendly parties from across the ocean? That may well be the case. But in the goals of our practical aims right now, it's not the case. We must, as Mao did, put aside his differences and toe a popular line, even if this popular line means collaborating with this evil leader, Chiang Kai-shek, to stop the complete destruction of the Chinese people. And with time, I promise you, disagreements will emerge that we can't even conceive of today. When Galileo dropped the ball bearing and the feather off the Tower of Pisa, he was stunned. It didn't work. They did not fall at the same rate as Aristotle had predicted. And this is the essence of the dialectical materialist method, is to discover inconsistencies in things we once believed to be completely consistent. And to answer your question, I do believe that as events continue to unfold, the program of the ACP and the party line and our relationship with these international parties around the globe, I assure you that will change, because the only constant is change. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, Tom, for closing thoughts and an answer to the question.
Well, I think we really didn't figure out any kind of solution here. I mean, I've said all along, I think that ideologically specific organizations can play a very positive role in terms of their direct practical organizing work. In terms of, and this is where indeed we do, show whether our ideas hold up in practice or not. We're trying to build unions, trying to build tenant unions for the various kinds of organizations, and and I think that that's the important role, and the organizations here can in fact develop into fairly significant sizable organizations. They develop a certain amount of space, influence in mass organizations. In the ultimate sense, it's only the mass organization, it's only the mass movement, the mass democratic organization that we should think of as taking power. Counting this obsolete, 1970 idea of Soviets. We have to think in terms of building self-managed unions, mass organizations of workers that have the ability to develop their struggles against the employers broadly within the industry, working together. And eventually, those organizations then can, in a revolutionary situation, be the basis for workers taking over the industries, expropriating capital, creating an industrial federation where workers can coordinate and plan for the operation of entire industries. And then through these various federations being federated together, we form a social federation, which through its own armed worker organization, its militia, and replace the bureaucratic state, push that aside, get rid of both the state and capital at the same time. And so that's the basis, the strategy going forward. And to do that, it's again, to build towards enough unity between the mass organizations, the various organizations struggle, where there's going to be differences between different political groups that are involved in them. Different movements have different issues. So there has to be then a building together of a common agreement, a common program that can be the basis of class front. And it's only through a class front that the working class can develop power to actually get rid of capitalism. And so it's not through any kind of revolutionary party. And these different, because there's going to be different ideologically specific organizations, inevitably, within the mass movement, within these organizations, it's a mistake to think of any one particular party as, we're going to build this party to be the party that's going to, control society and rebuild society and all that. Now, what will happen there is the working class will end up being subordinated to some new bureaucratic managerial ruling class. Some new form of oppression will occur. That's the danger there. And that's why I emphasize the need for self-managed mass organizations, worker control unions and so forth, and building the idea of them. That's the way forward.
Yes, Jeff?
Did you call on me?
Yes, yeah. For closing remarks, yeah.
Okay. We're talking about two interrelated questions. What's the union? Today, the American trade unions is the lowest point in the modern era. Today it represents some percent, at best, of the industrial working class. And the AFL-CIO, its major organization, is tied hand and foot to the Democratic Party and riddled with a corrupt bureaucracy, the likes of which we haven't seen in decades. It has to be rebuilt, democratized. The struggle to rebuild the American trade union movement, to build new unions representing 92% of the working class, industrial working class that is not even unionized, central priority for every revolutionary. And to give political expression to the emergence of a fighting trade union movement independent of the Democratic Party, we call for the unions to coalesce to form a labor party, to enter the political arena not only at the level of class struggle, at the point of production, but to challenge the capitalist party as to which class shall rule. That's one project. The other project, and totally inseparable from it, is the formation of the Revolutionary Socialist Party. Whether or not that party emerges as the true mass party of the working class, or whether or not the Labor Party project becomes imbued in the consciousness of workers and wins government power, is still up for debate. We don't have a crystal ball, but we support simultaneously building the Revolutionary Party and the trade union movement and the union movement and all other social struggles that challenge capitalist prerogatives, from the women's liberation movement, LGBT, and all other such struggles. We don't have a crystal ball as to how this will turn out. But the Revolutionary Party can only grow and learn by struggling for every aspect of workers' power, including political power and economic power at the point of production. But we still are wedded to the proposition that a revolutionary socialist party, which already has the lessons embodied in its program of hundreds of years of struggle, is a prerequisite to the emergence of a fighting labor party. They're totally different instruments. The trade union movement starts with the most primitive level of organization of working people. It doesn't have a historic program for class independence, at this point anyway. It doesn't have an anti-war program, a feminist program, an environmental program. And indeed, what it does have is largely reactionary, because it's subordinate to the Democratic Party. Its program is basically dictated by the Democratic Party, despite a few progressive or semi-progressive strikes. So I would conclude by saying there's no contradiction in building a revolutionary Marxist, Leninist, democratic, centralist party with a revolutionary program that we seek to win the working class majority to, and building the most powerful trade union movement that ever existed. The two are inseparable, and only life will demonstrate which one best represents the historic interests of the working class. The emergence of a revolutionary labor party that seeks to replace capitalist rule, or a mass revolutionary socialist party that embodies the vast majority of working people that aims at replacing capitalist rules through social revolution.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's give a round of applause.
Should I give my closing statement as well?
Oh, that was.
I was just answering a question.
Oh.
I'd written it down earlier.
Right.
Are you guys okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah.
Democracy in action.
Sorry, yeah. There you go.
Well, so Tom said that nothing was accomplished here today, and I disagree. Sure, I failed to convince the others to join the ACP. Amy failed to convince us to join the DSA. We failed to join the Green Party, and so on and so forth. And yes, of course. But failure is endemic to the scientific method. Failure is how you learn. And clearly, if I have failed, I must change the way that I speak and write here today. And I deeply regret that I didn't succeed. But I do believe that all these criticisms here were essential to what needed to be done to inspire the people here today, the minds of the youth, to develop the revolutionary organizations already in place. And it's they who will decide, even what the ACP follows. It won't be me, it won't be our leader, Haz al-Din, it'll be you. If you have criticisms, you can present them to the Central Committee. And through the Central Committee and the method of democratic centralism, your ideas will be the future. Not Marx's ideas, not Lenin's ideas, not Mao's ideas, but your ideas. And so I do believe something has been accomplished here today. And that thing is, I just call it what if. What if the way we're doing things is wrong? Like Galileo, when he dropped the ball bearing and the feather off the Tower of Pisa, why did he questioned whether Aristotle was correct. And that is what we too are doing here today, is we are conducting the scientific method. And Tom is right that Leninism is flawed. Jeff is right that the DSA is flawed. And democracy is flawed. But we here today, all of us here today, have contributed something to developing the correct line, even if that line is not clear to us today. Thank you.
All right.